You're acting more autistic these days. Since diagnosis or identification, you're acting more autistic.
This is one of my most hated responses. I've never had this from other people, but I've heard other people have it, and it frustrates the absolute living hell out of me. I hate it. I think the reason why this is a hard-hitting one is because you've got to know the person, and you still make that comment. You still make the comment that you're becoming more autistic, and it's like that's not a good thing to say. I just don't understand it. Like, I do understand it, but I can't imagine myself in a situation where I'd be that closed-minded. There is a lot of content out there on YouTube, the internet, and pretty much every social media platform about whether you are autistic or not, the reasons to why you may be autistic, but we don't often talk about the reasons to why you aren't autistic. We're going to have a look at the video from Autistic AF, tier ranking 20 absurd reasons you are not autistic. Kind of butchered that a little bit, didn't I? Let's do it.
Telling neurotypicals I'm autistic. I'm actually autistic. I don't think you are. Everyone's a little bit autistic. Immediate infantilizing. But you made eye contact. Telling autistic people I'm autistic. I'm autistic. We know. Hey friends, I'm Mike, a late diagnosed autistic adult. And if you or someone that you love is autistic, then you have definitely heard these reasons before. Now, I've asked both my YouTube community and my kind Patreon Discord members about your experiences. They're all in this cute pet container because it says pet storage on it. Like, this is where
I'd say one thing, that you're incredibly creative, Mike. Like, I would never be able to think of ideas like this. I don't think I even own a tin.
Store all of my pets. And they're all inside this cute container. Here they are. What I'm going to do is tier rank them from S tier all the way down to D tier with a bonus extra tier at the end. We're running from D tier, which are the weakest reasons, through C tier, which I'm calling ignorant but lesser known reasons, B tier, misguided but popular reasons, and A tier, the most common but ridiculous reasons, and of course, S tier, the godly, most absurd reasons.
It's really strange because usually, like, a lot of the reactions that people have, they sort of logically conflict with each other. Like, for example, people will say that, oh, everyone's a little bit autistic, and then say in the same vein that you're not autistic, which doesn't make much sense. That you tell them you're autistic, and they'll say you're not autistic, and then when they like point out behaviors of yours that are autistic, they'll just call you weird. Like, they'll just say that those are weird things, rather than like autistic things. I had a great idea of it in my brain.
If you've heard one that you haven't seen in this video, let me know in the comment section below, and they might make their way into another video. Let's do it. Pop. You look normal. This statement is deeply flawed because it implies a couple of things. One of them is that autism is a visible disability, which it's not. And it's almost like saying, because I cannot detect your autism with my eyes, therefore you are not disabled, you do not have autism, you are not autistic. No, D tier for that one.
Yeah, it's a pretty weak one. I think usually what people mean when they say you look normal is that you don't stim openly around them. You appear to have, moderate communication abilities. I think that those are two things, but also I've seen it happen with, there's a few Instagram creators, particularly, I think one called Trevor over on Instagram, Trevor Carroll. Highly recommend you follow him if you can. He does a lot of lifestyle related things amongst talk about autism, and he's a very handsome chap. And one of the things that happens with a lot of handsome or pretty sort of autism creators out there, that people just don't want to believe it, that they're autistic, because they don't think that autistic people can be attractive, which I think is a pretty bad one. But yeah, I mean, it's a pretty weak one, to be honest. Like, what do you mean? How do you spot a person who does not look autistic? I have no idea. Let's go for the next one.
You don't have meltdowns. Meltdowns are not the only indicator of autism, and they can also be indicators of other things. The other point is that we learn to mask. Many of us learn to hide our meltdowns from public or professional settings.
Yes. Yep. I think that the paper with the glass break is a great combo. Saying that you don't have meltdowns is like ridiculous, because usually what happens, and it's something that's been seen a lot in autistic kids and also autistic adults, when we have a stressful time, we don't always express it on the outside. We don't always have meltdowns on the outside. Usually our response is to shut down. It's sort of like a protective mechanism. Or we do like what a lot of human beings do, which is we bottle the emotions. We don't feel safe in a certain environment, whether it's public, whether it's a group setting, whether we are at school. And so when we come home and we're in a safe environment and we're around people who care about us and we feel safe with, that's when the meltdowns happen. So it's a pretty bad one. Like, especially if it comes from like an acquaintance, a loose friend, or a stranger. It's like, how do you know? You lie. You're lying. You don't know. I have meltdowns, you know? People don't expect me to. You know, I'll say it outright and people are sort of giving me the side eye about it. I thought I might actually broke something at first when I watched the video. Yeah. Yeah, hide as well. Yeah. Go to the toilets, sit down on the lid, listen to some music, try and recover. Usually the way it goes.
D tier for that one. One more. You're too social. Okay, I'm not sure who this.
I'd probably put the meltdown one at the bottom. It's just a silly one. Like, just have, like, just get rid of it. It doesn't deserve to place on the tier list.
Almost from. There's quite a lot of us in the Discord community that are actually quite social with each other. Like, there's a strange misconception that I come across quite often, which is that autism is a sort of super introversion. Like, yes. You cannot be autistic and extroverted. Of course you can't. And autistic people are all super introverted. Some autistic people like socializing with others, especially if it's around our passions and so-called special interests, even if we do find it challenging to do. Social behavior does not exclude you from being autistic.
100% agree. There is a likelihood for us to be more introverted than the average person, which is true. I think the majority of people out there are introverts anyway. I think perhaps if we lived in a world where we would feel safer and we would amend to the sort of, not camouflage, but people would make a little bit more of an effort to understand our way of communicating, then perhaps we wouldn't be introverted as much. Because I know that I was, I hardly spoke at all. I pretty much spent all of my time either studying or doing sports. Didn't really give myself a lot of time to socialize because I just didn't feel safe enough to. I didn't have the confidence to speak. I didn't really know what to say. That was my way of camouflaging. It was just by avoiding talking altogether because I found it too difficult. But 100%, like, I know quite a few extroverted autistic people, and they are extroverted for sure. They usually tend to be ADHDers as well. So ADHDers, to be honest. I'm gonna go take a little break. So I feel like I'm overheating. I think this may be my interoception barrier has been breached. I'm gonna go put on a t-shirt. T-shirt acquired. That's much better. I had 2 horrible meltdowns when I was pregnant. We didn't know I was autistic, and my husband was utterly baffled and horrified. Yeah, I can imagine. Especially if you don't know. Like, it's one of the issues with misdiagnosis and stuff. Like, people assign different sort of potential disorders and conditions to them. And like treat them and give them meds and stuff, and God forbid section them. That's one. Oh, I have no idea what's going on with me today. I'm all over the place. Let's continue.
We didn't give it a tier, did we? C tier.
Yeah.
You don't look autistic. I'm pretty sure I've done this one. No, Sally, I don't look autistic around you. I was mercilessly bullied and mocked for my autistic traits, not my autistic look. That goes in S tier. Well, your brain looks normal, so you must be faking it. This was from the YouTube community post. It was a neurologist that said that, apparently, which is why I've written it down here, like that. Such statements from medical professionals are incredibly dismissive. It's as if to say, well, I've looked at your brain scans, I didn't see anything. Well, pray tell, what were you expecting to see? What were you expecting to find? Autism is not always detectable through brain scans. There is no test for autism currently of any sort. There is no medical test for autism. Autism is a neurodevelopmental condition that involves differences in brain connectivity and function, not just structure. So I'm not sure what this neurologist was expecting to see.
No, 100%. I think that there is something to say for, like, I think the difficulty is with applying biomedical neuroscience techniques to psychological stuff is the actual thing, what it is. It's not a brain thing. Like, the concept of autism is a collection of traits and, signs and things of that nature. And so when you try to understand it from the objective sort of brain scan level, you look into people's brains and look at it. And right, mentioning stuff about the structure, like it's not just which brain regions are bigger and the other ones aren't. Different brain regions can change, throughout one's life, depending on what your habits are, what you do, whether you have any illicit substances, whether you experience some kind of trauma. There are many different ways that your brain can change. And it's not always going to be like a 100% transferable thing, like finding, and saying this is an autistic brain, I should have said battery of tests as opposed to singular CT or MRI scan. I see. Yeah, well, I know that some autistic people have gone for brain scans and, they've pointed out different sort of regions of the brain and said, this is like an autistic brain, but it's a very complex thing. And I wouldn't say that it's 100% accurate, maybe in like 2050 they'll have like brain scanners all around. You can just walk through it and get a picture of your brain. That'll be interesting. Who knows where science will go? Could be good, could be bad.
D tier, I think. But you make eye contact. Eye contact is often used as a sort of, you didn't make eye contact, or you're making eye contact, therefore I know. It's kind of like a very dismissive thing. I tend to think if you hear that from a medical professional, that they are just not that educated. Their training must be very out of date for someone to say something like that. It falls along similar lines as, well, you're a girl, can't possibly be autistic.
Yeah.
Making eye contact is a skill that many autistic people learn to cope with societal expectations. In the West, I should say. The whole eye contact thing is as silly as it is regional. Like in the East, you don't make eye contact. It's seen as threatening and impolite as well. But in the West, it's seen as untrustworthy if you are averting your gaze. You didn't make eye contact, you can't possibly be autistic. It's just like saying autism is only for Americans and Europeans. It's daft. So it's going to go in B tier.
Yeah. It is definitely misguided and popular. It's a very common one. Like anyone who thinks that any sort of lay individual, like mainstream neurotypical, will always say, I can tell they're autistic because they don't make as much eye contact. It's like, it's a little bit more complicated than that. Like, as Mike said, there are elements of masking, those coping mechanisms that we use to fit in and sort of blend in, camouflage into neurotypical society. But eye contact in general can be different for autistic people, but it's not always going to be lower. Some autistic people make very, very strong eye contact that has very, very little breaks. Some people do both. It really depends. Like, for me, I often have to stop myself from making too much eye contact. And other times, I try and make a little bit more. It really depends on the situation. I honestly don't really think about it, to be honest, because, generally if people can't socialize with me based on where my eyes are looking, they're gonna probably be a bit more judgmental on average, I would say. But I get it. It's like one of those social things. It's like an indirect indicator. I think some people can interpret it as like having low confidence, being shy, mistrustful, as Mike said, amongst many other things, which is not good. And I'd say that it kind of sucks. Like, you think about going for job interviews, people's impressions of you matter a lot above what your sort of skills and your experiences are like, which is a really hard reality sometimes. My dad does the really uncomfortable soul-staring eye contact, and my granddad does that. Hello, Bree. Good to see you, my friends. And hello, Neurogeezer. We need your mental energy tests. Oh, your mental battery is very low. Now go take a nap. Yeah, I would like that. Just an objective way to tell if I need to rest or not. Can take the responsibility off my hands.
Here we go. I don't know why I'm shuffling them around. They are all random. Oh, this is a good one. You didn't get diagnosed as a child. Oh, this is so similar to the, well, you don't look like my 5-year-old nephew. Many people, especially women and girls, and those with lower support needs, are diagnosed later in life, if at all. Early diagnosis is just often missed out due to varying presentation of symptoms, lack of awareness at the time, where you went to school, what country you're in, your gender, ethnicity. There's so many disparities. So I'm going to put this in C tier. I'll put this in C tier for...
Not diagnosed as a child. Yeah, it is an uncommon one. I don't think people have ever asked me. People do ask me if we're having a conversation about it, when were you diagnosed? You know, I don't know if that's along the similar vein, but I was not diagnosed at the age of 5. It was 10 for me. Usually you can spot those signs early in life, but it doesn't always mean that it gets picked up. I mean, one of like the more interesting aspects of being autistic is, you know, there is a heavy genetic element to it, and so it's likely that if you're born autistic, you're going to have some autism in the family, perhaps one of your parents. And so when you sort of go through life, people's baselines on how life should feel and how hard things should be and things of that nature can differ. And if that person doesn't know that they're autistic, that parent, you know, they go through life sort of masking, trying to conform to the rest of society, then they're obviously not gonna pick it up. They'll just say that, oh, this is what everybody does. You just have to fake it and you just have to do all of these things. And it's not true, but you know, it can definitely get in the way of them accepting that their child is autistic as well, I would say. Mike in the chat says, ableism from my perspective, it's along lines of your symptoms, traits are obviously not sufficiently disabling. Otherwise you would be caught, they would have caught you as a child. Yeah, I know what you mean. I mean, psychologists, people of that nature, they could see that as just something else. Anger issues, you know, if you have meltdowns and stuff, some type of, you know what I mean, one of the first sort of conceptualizations of autism was childhood schizophrenia. So it tells you a lot about that stuff. They're like, there's so much potential for misdiagnosis. I mean, not even going to the fact that, you know, it's been studied mostly in white men, white boys. You know, there's not as much evidence and data surrounding autistic women. Although there has been in sort of recent years, which is good.
Must try better. I don't think they're deliberately trying to be invalidating. It just is. Okay, what do we got?
I think that's important to say. I think a lot of this stuff usually arises from ignorance and also differences in the conceptualization of autism. So like if you say that you're autistic to someone and they say, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And you know, you think of it as sort of more of a neutral sort of positives and negatives, not something to be like sorry for. You might take that as a bit of an offense because, you know, it's kind of a mismatch in conceptualizations. And the ignorance one, I mean, it speaks for itself. You know, there's so much common knowledge that goes about on the internet about autism that just kind of ramps up and sort of snowballs into the mainstream. And every Tom, Dick and Harry is talking about it.
You don't stim. Oh, great. This is a really good one. Many autistic people mask their stimming in public due to societal pressure. Stimming is a natural way to self-regulate our emotions, but it can be suppressed due to drawing attention or ridicule.
Yes.
Because if you are in school and you are hand flapping, let's go for a nice common one, you're going to get that bullied out of you very, very fast. If somebody says you don't stim, what they're actually saying is you're pretty high masking. This one is going to go in A tier.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, like, the person in this situation needs to understand what stimming is. So there's going to be, like, people with sort of a basic conceptualization of autism, usually looking at it from the sort of pathology standpoint, I guess. But yeah, I mean, it's another one. I mean, 100%. I love the camera angles. Yeah, me too. It's very enticing, Mike. Can masking be unconscious? I think masking can be a habit. Not necessarily maybe say unconscious. I'd say you can do it habitually to the point where it just becomes part of your personality and just never shuts off. I think so in that case. You guys are talking about handshakes. Handshakes is a strange one. It's not my favourite. My favourite thing to do when people grasp way too hard in the handshake is just let my hand go like that. Just like give them a really uncomfortable handshake. So I know what you're trying to do. Especially if they like pull you towards their body. They're trying to do that whole I'm the dominant one kind of thing. I just don't have any patience.
Where would you put it? Are you sure? This one relates to self-diagnosis because questioning someone's diagnosis is dismissive. It's just a way of just dismissing, right? And it undermines somebody's personal experience. Yeah. I'm going to put that one in C tier.
Definitely a very common one. Are you sure? I've heard this piece of research. I've heard this psychologist talking about autism, and they said this about it. It doesn't really align with what you're saying, or, you know, are you sure that you're autistic and it's not caused by your experiences with your mother, your cold, unfeeling mother, or traumatic experiences that you've had? Oh my God. I mean, those are things that people point to. Again, usually people with some level of awareness of autism, but just not enough. They haven't dove into it enough to see past the whole sort of pathology stuff. Interesting.
This is one I had when I went to my GP. You have friends, you have family, you have a job, you can drive a car, you can do X thing that the medical professional or the other person thinks an autistic person can't do. This really is just down to a lack of awareness and just a lack of willingness to read, even to browse the pages of the National Autistic Society. Just read up, just Google for 5 minutes. It's not that difficult, really, is it? Look, if you have social connections or employment or a family, that doesn't disqualify you from being autistic. It just means that you have support or you've found ways to cope. Many autistic people work hard to maintain relationships and employment, despite their challenges. Come on. Not just because this one was mine, but this one's going in A tier.
Yeah.
Let's go. You can talk.
Agreed on that one.
Verbal communication varies widely between autistic people. Some autistic people are non-verbal. They don't speak. Some are intermittently non-verbal. When I was at school for 2 to 3 years, I didn't speak in school. That was not selective mutism. It was selective, I don't want to be bullied. I don't want to say anything that people will tease. So I'll just keep quiet. Some autistic people are non-verbal and do not speak. Some autistic people are very articulate. This is about support needs. It's not actually about whether or not you're autistic or not. I'm going to put it in B tier.
Yeah. It is definitely common and ridiculous. It requires a little bit more of a detailed look into autism. Perhaps people who have just idly come across it, maybe seen like an article or two on autism from like the newspaper, something like that. Or they've seen like a show and they've had a guest on who's, you know, an autistic kid or adult who's nonverbal. Yeah, I mean, I'm glad that Mike brought up the not speaking at school thing. That was definitely something that I did a lot. Even like into the late stages of, I'd probably say, late stages of secondary school even. Yeah, I mean, the selective mutism thing is interesting. That's definitely something that can happen for me. Usually like during a shutdown, or if I'm going to have a meltdown, I'll just go completely mute. Or only retain some level of basic communication. That's usually what happens. But most of the time, not so much. It really depends. I'd say that a lot of people out there, a lot of autistic people can actually be hyperlexic. So have an extremely wide vocabulary and very, very well spoken. Usually, like individuals like that, they do tend to speak with a certain flair to them. I think I'm probably one of those people because I do tend to use a lot of flamboyant vocabulary because I find it nice. I like saying it. And I've met a few people who are like that as well. It really depends on the person, but definitely not a reason to say that you're not autistic if you can speak. Unselected me. Yeah, it's not always a cognitive effort to become selectively mute. It's usually based on anxiety in my experience. You know, you just kind of get this mental block. You can't select when you're going to do it. Situationally mute, perhaps.
You were fine as a child. Many autistic traits become more apparent with age, especially as life becomes more complex. I went to a primary school that had a really nice nature-wooded area, and I would go and I would sit in there, and I'd sit on the floor, and I'd study the grass, and I'd study the plants around me. That's just not acceptable behaviour as an adult. Not something you would do at work, right? The analogy for school would be an employment somewhere. You can't just like bugger off and sit on the grass and count the grass blades or just watch stuff moving. You just can't do that. You can't decompress in that way. Acceptable ways to decompress in a workplace would be maybe sitting at your desk, eating a sandwich, maybe standing around a water cooler, getting some water or a cup of tea in the kitchen. This doesn't really cut it for a lot of autistic people, including myself. So these increased pressures, the increasing life complexity, the more stuff you've got going on, the adulting, childhood mechanisms fail. They don't always work as responsibilities and social demands increase. Simple as that. This one's going into A tier.
Common ridiculous, indeed. I don't know. I feel like, I think some things that you can do when you're a kid, it doesn't really prop up as being anything sort of strange. But I guess if like you're an adult sort of counting blades of grass, you sort of laid down on your stomach, it makes sense that people would take that for odd. It doesn't really seem odd for me. So it's a lovely freeze frame. It doesn't seem very odd for me because I don't tend to make judgments like that, like just naturally. But I get people making those types of things. I don't know. I think as well when you get older, you do find different ways to regulate yourself. Like the ways that I regulated myself when I was a child was a lot different to how I do it now. When I was a kid, I used to spin around in a circle and go on the trampoline. It doesn't really work for me that well anymore. So now going to the gym is a big source of sensory input that relaxes me massively. It relaxes anyone massively, but it also gets in that sort of proprioceptive input as well. So you can find different ways of going about it for sure with time. Next frame.
Here we go. You're being rude. Direct communication is often misunderstood as rudeness. Autistic people may communicate more bluntly or honestly, which can be really misinterpreted by neurotypicals. This is kind of adjacent to the double empathy problem, that issue where autistics and allistics, non-autistics, struggle sometimes to communicate and have themselves be heard. Whereas within their own tribe, neurotypicals with neurotypicals, neurodivergents with neurodivergents, autistics with autistics, those barriers don't exist. This one?
Yep.
B tier, I think.
Yeah.
Everybody's...
I agree with that one. Yeah, I think that's the whole cross-cognitive communication thing. I mean, there's a lot of barriers to neurotypicals and autistic people communicating effectively with each other. Like a lot. Like relatability, the choice of communication. I would say that the directness is definitely like a big one too. Rudeness, it's a bit of a... I mean, the way that I've learned to adapt for it, because I like using direct communication. A lot of people, a lot of psychologists, weirdly, say that having direct, clear communication is a good thing. You go to workplaces, they say, have direct, clear communication. Yet, people find it strange when you have clear and direct communication. I think the main place where the direct communication becomes an issue for people is when it's things that they don't want to hear, and you say it. It just can be as simple as that. You have a thought, you feel some way about something, and you just explain it bluntly, rather than sort of indirectly adjust your communication to give the other person the impression that you're not too happy with them, kind of thing. One way, a little bit more confrontational for sure, like being direct about stuff. Usually people are very serious, like neurotypicals are very serious when they are direct in their communication with someone, and it's a negative thing. That's usually like a source of confrontation to people, whereas to us, it's like, this is just a natural part of how we like to talk, to speak. If you are one of those people and you find that you're direct with neurotypicals and they have a really hard time with it, don't stop. Don't stop being direct. But I have really seen positive utility in using softeners in direct communication. So softeners being sort of the kind of like beating around the bush, I guess, to a certain degree, or putting a caveat before you say something. So if you say, if someone's making a nasty noise, instead of saying, "Can you stop, please? It's really annoying," you could say, "Hey, I know you're probably sort of off in the daydream and all that." And maybe that's not a great example, Thomas. I think you have an idea of what I'm trying to say. You've got to take the sharp end of the directness and just, even that example I'd say is a terrible one. Just blunt the blade before you stab them with it. How does that make any sense? Oh my god. I'm sure someone will have a better example of that. Yeah, no. But if you know that something's going to be upsetting to somebody, adding in a little softener, I think is fine. I don't necessarily think that is masking to a certain degree. I mean, would you consider any like? So here's the thing: it's like masking is hiding your autistic nature, whereas in my experience, there is a difference between trying to facilitate cross-cognitive communication versus hiding your autistic self. Yeah, just don't prefix it with no offense, but yeah. No, for sure thing. Mike says, "Dear X, I hope this email finds you well. Please turn off the effing air conditioner. I hope you're having a lovely weekend." No, so I think that's an important distinction to make, because like if you're doing something, if you're modifying yourself to be more understandable to neurotypicals, then I think that's fine. You're not changing yourself. You're not becoming less direct. You're still saying the thing. It's not like you're trying to be like wholly indirect and just never say what's on your mind. It's not a very comfortable thing to do, but it's just about like remembering, I guess, or being cognizant and aware that, although neurotypicals don't necessarily give us a lot of free passes on stuff and they don't really understand how our brains work, that, if we do understand the differences in our communications, then we can sort of learn to do that. I'm not saying like it does require energy. I wouldn't say in every single situation you just soften all the directness. I just mean if you know that something's going to be particularly hard to hear for someone, then softeners can be quite helpful. If it's something that's sort of emotional to them or sort of deep, or something that's very tied to their personality, for example, think of it as fluff. Yeah, bit of fluff. I don't think it's masking though, but I can understand why it may come across in that way. It doesn't really have to be something that's like requires a lot of your time and attention. It's just, adding a little bit of fluff to directness. That makes sense. I think I have a better way of explaining it soon.
Everybody's autistic these days. Comes down to a lack of understanding. It's a flippant comment. It's something that's often portrayed in certain political media. It's not just everyone's autistic these days, but everyone is. Insert any attribute or any group here,
Gen Z.
Any minority here. Everyone is these days. All doing that. It's a epidemic of autism, an autism epidemic. What would that look like? I wonder what an autism epidemic would look like. Get back to you on that. Increased awareness, increased conversation. Doesn't mean that everyone's autistic. No. But it might mean that those who wondered why have an answer all of a sudden. How's that? I'm going to put that in the E tier.
In the E tier. So it's a really bad one. I think mostly that everyone is autistic these days is used as a way to undermine the importance of what you're telling them. If you tell them that you're autistic and they're like, what? It's like, well, everyone's autistic these days kind of thing. It's more used in a way to sort of palm you off or stereotype you into a certain category. It is a very, very common one for sure. Yeah. I don't know. I think maybe it comes from, because I've been saying for a long time that at some point autism content creators, people who talk about autism, like the whole community is going to be larger and larger And when communities get larger and larger, there's more eyes on it, more people from outside of the community are seeing what's going on and they're commenting on it and they're making opinions and things of that nature. And then you have particular sort of detractors online who sort of talk about this and see it as an issue, and then it becomes like this whole political thing. You know, people tie the politics to it. They group the autistic people into a certain tribe that they hate on quite a bit, or they sort of highlight as being the problem in our society, something along those natures. Just very much just having a very, you know, so having an opinion that's already there that, you know, they can apply to this situation as well. You know, we talk about inclusion and things of that nature, and so, you know, when they come across autistic people who are fighting for inclusion, you know, they sort of lump us into the same groups. Mike says that's true. I find when a video does particularly well, YouTube shows it to outside of the autism audience, starts to attract a great deal of comments like this. 100%. It's a way to brush us off. Yeah, I think so too. I feel like NTs get a pass on almost everything. Yeah, for sure. I mean, it can feel like that way sometimes, because most NTs would generally agree with each other if it's an issue with the whole cross-cognitive thing, the differences between autistic and holistic individuals, and you have like a group discussion about it. You know, most people are going to be neurotypical or holistic, and so they're going to agree with them, and it's, you know, kind of makes us feel like the outsiders sometimes, and nobody sort of sees our perspective. But, you know, everyone's NT these days. Politics is just other people's unwanted takes. Yeah, for sure.
Clearly everyone isn't autistic. Okay, what do we have here? You've got a great sense of humour, or you've got a sense of humour. You understand sarcasm, that sort of thing. Autistic people can have a great sense of humour. I found some wonderful autistic comics. Joe Wells, for example, absolutely fantastic. Autistic humour doesn't have to be that far different from neurotypical humour. There are some fantastic autistic comedians. Here's something that might be different. They may be self-deprecating. They might make autism jokes, or find humour in unique ways. I'm putting this one in B.
100%. Yeah, I don't understand that they're not having a sense of humour thing. I think maybe it might be like, maybe people's perceptions of it is that we can't communicate very well, and therefore we can't string together jokes and be relatable to people as much. I don't think that's the case. I do think that perhaps there are ways that we can find our own humour in things which are relatable between autistic people, but not to like everybody else. Like, well, I mean, the autism memes being a standout one there. You know, just particular aspects of neurotypical behaviour that we find funny or interesting or curious. We may make a joke about them, and, you know, it doesn't really align with most people, but it might align with us. Oh,
you have empathy. Unbelievably. I've spoken to psychologists that have said, it's incredible, you have empathy. And I said, what? Hang on, let's just stop here. Let's roll back. What did I say or do that led you to that conclusion that gave you the cognitive dissonance? Because autistic people do feel empathy. This boils down to essentially the theory of mind. And the idea is that autistic people don't have empathy and can't understand that other people have ideas going on in their own minds. That's absolute crap. There are empathy differences in the autistic population as there are in the general population. However, autistic people can feel hyper-empathy, too much empathy. They can find themselves caught up in the emotions of others. I made a video about this last year, and it's possible that an autistic person's empathetic response, did I say that right? It can just be intense and overwhelming. This hyper-empathy, this picking up the emotions and feelings of others. The vibe in a room, it can be overwhelming for a lot of autistic people.
Yeah, I think it's a silly one. I think it mostly boils down to the way that we react, or the way that we act when we are empathizing with somebody. Usually, if I am empathizing a lot, I tend to be quite quiet, you know, whereas I think if someone was empathizing, if a neurotypical was empathizing with another one, they'd be kind of looking into their eyes and sort of nodding and like being like, oh yeah, you know, sort of positive affirmations throughout their sort of conversation. Whereas for me, I really like to sit back, look to the side and just try and feel what that situation would feel like for me. And that doesn't always come across as empathic. A lot of the time that comes across to many people as being disinterested or being distracted or not taking it very seriously. But I think it's pretty strong for a lot of people from what I've heard. I mean, we have, sort of two different aspects to empathy. One is, you can actually feel what the other person's doing, and the other aspect is you act, and perhaps the ways that we act when we're empathizing might look a bit different. Usually if someone tells me, for example, if I was at like a social group or something, someone tells me that they're having a bad time before the event, and then we go to the event, I'm always keeping my eye on them. I'm like making sure that they're having a good time. If they're not so much, or if there's any disagreements, I'm making sure that I'm over there, just to keep an eye on them. Like I think, when someone presents a problem which is very deeply emotional, I don't think, the best idea is to give advice on the spot, because, it's a very complex situation. I'd want to think about it. I'd want to, make some suggestions, but really flesh out how can I help you kind of thing. So I think it can display itself in different ways, but I mean it's an empathy myth for a reason, because it's just not true. It's just people making judgments based on our differing communication styles most of the time. If I empathize, I don't know what to do and what is acceptable to do. That's the problem, Corb. There is no there is no other than listening to them and just saying yeah, and just making sure that you're being an active listener. I don't think we really need to do much, but it really depends on the circumstance. A lot of people, when they are looking for support based around an emotional issue or a feeling, they're not looking for advice. They're looking to be heard and empathized with and comforted. A lot of the time, unless they're very, very close to you, or they are asking for some type of advice. That sort of approach to it has worked very well for me. There's not many situations that it hasn't. Although, be careful. If someone realizes just how good of a empathizer or an active listener you are, they may go to you after everything, no matter how small, just to talk to you about it. So. Be wise. They don't know how to comfort people. No, I honestly think it's just being an active listener and just thinking about what it would be like and saying, that sounds awful. Like I'm trying to imagine myself going through the same experience, and it seems like something difficult, and then you can, once they kind of get out of the system, and you comfort them, then perhaps you can ask them if there's anything you can do to help, Usually it's just you allowing them to open up, blow off steam, whatever, something of that nature. Once that's over with, then you can have a conversation about what might be the best way forwards. That's what I think. Not saying that I'm the best with everything. It's worked for me.
You're acting more autistic these days. Since diagnosis or identification, you're acting more autistic.
This is one of my most hated responses. I've never had this from other people, but I've heard other people have it, and it frustrates the absolute living hell out of me. I hate it. Okay, go on, Mike.
Discovering that you're autistic can lead you to become less masked. It can lead to you becoming more authentic or taking some steps towards it. Diagnosis can bring relief and the freedom. It's such a relief. It feels like you've been uncomfortable your whole life, and finally you get a set of clothes that actually fit you. Mm-hmm. It's incredible and gives you that freedom to be yourself. So you start to just stretch out a little bit. This is why it's really helpful to find neurodiverse community, like the lovely people in the Discord, the Autistic Cats community, fantastic people. You're not a savant. Savant ability.
Well, let's pause that for a second. Yeah, it's usually in response to, so like you might watch like a video about me, and I'm talking about sort of unmasking, sort of self-advocating for yourself. The issue with like all of that, which is it is beneficial, that is for sure, to yourself, your sanity, your self-identity, just going easy on yourself, making life easy for yourself by making adjustments. All of that is great, but people are not going to be understanding of it all the time. Some people will. Some people it's like, oh, okay, and they just accept it and they're just nice about it. Other people, not so much at all. Like they'll fight you to the grave about it. Doesn't matter how much you talk about it, they'll just fight you to the grave about it. And then when they see you changing in ways that goes against whatever kind of social norms they expect of you, and then they'll criticize you about it. So I think the reason why this is a hard-hitting one is because you've got to know the person, and you still make that comment. You still make the comment that you're becoming more autistic, and it's like that's not a good thing to say. Come on, like we're all changing. We're all when we unmask, it's a hard thing to do. We need people to support us, not criticize us. Diagnosis led me to lose a lot of my masking behavior. It wasn't a conscious choice exactly. Interesting. I think once you're aware of stuff, I think you can naturally, it's like, I think being aware that you're autistic, I think is obviously like the first step, but just learning about it, you can sort of pick up different parts of yourself through the process and just be able to sort of label different things as being autism related, perhaps. And if you come across something that's negative, you might be like, oh, perhaps you have like burnout. You have a strange sort of relationship with work and life where you go really, really hard at stuff, and then you have a dip, and then you can't do anything, and then you go really, really hard, and then you have a dip, and you might be like, oh, I learned something about autistic burnout. Maybe I'm going to try adjust my life, just to make things a little bit more consistent and normalized day to day. People might say, oh, it's, you don't need to make those adjustments. Oh, God damn it. It's a bad one. I'd put it in S tier, to be honest, because it's a real thing to do. I just don't understand it. Like, I do understand it, but I can't imagine myself in a situation where I would be that closed-minded that I wouldn't say like, oh, what does that mean? And, why, perhaps even why are you acting more autistic these days? As in like a genuine question. And then you can explain it to them and they'll be like, oh, okay, I understand. It's not like that though. It's always said with, I was going to say malice, but malice is a very strong word. I think you know what I mean. My sister doesn't understand this. Yeah, it can be really difficult, especially if you're around that person a lot as well. It just adds another element of anxiety, sort of forcing you to conform all the time. They don't understand it is very damaging to our mental health to always try to conform to societal norms. Yeah. I think some people misconstrue that as like, don't apply yourself to any social norms or societal things. I'm not talking like generally everything. I mean the things that cause us stress and the things that cause us to feel like we aren't expressing who we truly are. The things that cause, the anxiety and the stress and the thoughts constantly, the things that stop us from being able to enjoy communication with socializing with other people. So we always have this thing in the back of our heads telling us that, we're not, we have to speak in this way, We can't just self-advocate for how we want to speak. Contempt. People who tell me I'm acting more autistic say it with contempt. Yeah, for sure.
Abilities are rare among autistic people. And it's not a requirement to be a savant to receive an autism diagnosis. Most autistic individuals do not have extraordinary talents, but still experience the daily challenges associated with being autistic. In my life, I've met a great deal of neurodivergent people. I've met many autistic people. I've only met one savant to my knowledge. He was an incredible mathematician. I suspect probably needed help getting dressed in the morning. Being a savant is not a requirement to be autistic. This is the Rain Man effect, which we'll talk about in another video.
I mean, Rain Man, for all intents and purposes, was like the first introduction of autism to the mainstream. I just wish that it was I just wish that it wasn't just this extremely sort of rare individual that doesn't really apply to. Yeah, they could have done better with the first sort of mainstream autism film, but we cannot go back in time.
I'm going to put this one though in S tier.
Yeah,
this one,
absurd.
You're Too Smart. Very similar to the Savant, maybe just like a level down. Who knows? But it's very much like saying, to be autistic, you have to have a low IQ, a low intellectual ability. Intelligence levels vary among autistic people, just like they do in the general population. Being smart doesn't mean that someone is autistic or isn't autistic. As autism affects social and communicative... That's my point. Autism affects social and communication skills, not intelligence. That one. This one is going to live. Autism affects social communication skills, not intelligence. This one is going to be S tier, right next to the Savant.
Yeah, you are smart. Oh, it's like a lot of them are just insults, you know. They're kind of like backhanded insults, aren't they? In a sense, maybe. Or maybe, I don't know, because if they're saying like, you're not a savant, you are smart, you look normal, you have empathy, you make eye contact, you're too social. Like, I suppose in a sense, they're trying to, some people might be trying to pay you a compliment by doing that, but just completely missing the mark with it, you know. Definitely like aspects that, you know, have a large degree of ignorance to them about it, which sometimes like people do use them as like an offhanded comment, something to, you know, say that you're not autistic or something to, I don't know. I think definitely like there are people out there who do it on purpose to like irritate us. I think some people just generally are trying to pay a compliment, but they're just too like ignorant of it. Like they just don't have enough information or knowledge on autism. I try and to exercise a modicum of patience with individuals who just don't know about it, but you can usually tell by the way that they say it and their general demeanor and like how well you know them that, you know, whether they're trying to annoy you or not. I'm smart too, but I'm slow. Yeah, my communication is very slow, I think, and also my processing time can be quite slow. It really depends on the day, really, especially if I'm like in a burnout or something. It can take me ages to process stuff. I think if you're a misguided ableist, almost trying to be nice in a very misguided way. Yeah, it's it just. To us, it doesn't sound like a nice thing to say because it's like we've kind of accepted it's the whole thing that I was saying about before. We've sort of accepted about our autistic self, and we may even see it in sort of a neutral way, not particularly as like a flat out pathology. Whereas their sort of baseline understanding of autism comes from a very pathology mindset, you know, and so some people might try to say stuff like this as a compliment to say that you're not, you know, you're above your disability, you're above your disorder, you know, that kind of thing.
We're up to our last one.
Last
the
one.
Autistic Captain. Let's go.
Let's do it.
Stop fidgeting. Look, fidgeting is a common way for autistic people to self-regulate and stay focused. It's kind of a form of stimming. It helps manage sensory input and anxiety, okay? We need to be a bit less judgmental, I think. And by we, I mean neurotypicals, obvs. And there it is. That's our tier list. A fun video for today. These are just a few of the comments that autistic people have leveled at them every single day. It's a fun video, but with a genuine message. Have you ever wondered what would happen if autistic people wrote the diagnostic criteria for allistics or non-autistics? Wonder no more. Click this video to find out.
Yes, I'd highly agree. Brilliant. Yeah. I did a neurotypical syndrome one, I think like 2 or 3 years ago. You know, we're all human beings. We only know what we've read and we only know what we've heard. You know, some people just don't get the full picture when it comes to autism. A lot of people don't, to be honest. I think they often just generally don't know how to help. Yeah. 100%. And they sort of attribute like a feeling of shame to us, like they expect us to feel shame about being autistic or sorry for ourselves, and so they try to comfort us by saying we're not really that autistic, or all that kind of stuff. It's sometimes good intentions, quite often very misguided and unwillfully ignorant. I would say unwillfully. Some people are willfully ignorant. God, you just want to ignore those people, though. My lord.